The most dangerous predator isn't the alpha who claims you. It's the enigma who lets you think you have. I became the perfect broken omega to charm my childhood crush. My deception was a beautiful poison, my love a cage, and his surrender the sweetest revenge. The taming had begun. Episode 1: The Broken Facade. The rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking the city, a cold, needling assault that matched the chaos in my head. I watched it from the sterile warmth of my 40th floor office, the one with my real name on the door, Dr. Adrian Vale. But down there, in the slick neon reflections, I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't an enigma, that rare thing that made alphas and omegas alike uneasy. I was about to become Ari, broken, lost, his. Kaelan Thorne, just the name was a hook in my ribs, set there since we were kids. He'd been the bright, arrogant alpha heir even then, who'd once shielded me from bullies only to later declare, with the casual cruelty of youth, that he'd only ever bond with a true, pure omega. Anything else was clutter, his word. My designation, the powerful, balanced enigma, was the ultimate clutter. So I created Ari, art student, parents gone, savings drained, an omega on the verge of shattering, the perfect project for a control freak like Kaelan. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest as I stepped into the downpour. I'd traded my tailored suits for threadbare jeans and a thin sweater that clung, soaked, to my skin in seconds. I'd mussed my hair, pale under the streetlights, and let the genuine chill make me shake. The performance was everything. I timed it perfectly, collapsing not in a dramatic heap, but in a shuddering, exhausted slump right under the awning of the Thorne Holdings Tower, just as his black car pulled up. The door opened. First I saw the polished leather of his shoes, then the perfect line of his charcoal suit trousers. My gaze traveled up, and there he was, Kaelan. Time had sharpened his handsomeness into something severe. Jet black hair, a stern mouth, eyes the color of a winter storm scanning the scene with immediate impatience. His driver moved to shoo me away, but Kaelan held up his hand. He looked down at me, a waterlogged stray at his doorstep. I made my eyes wide, letting all the calculated fear and desperate hope I'd practiced show. "Please," I whispered, the word catching on a fake sob. "I'm sorry. I don't have anywhere to go." I let my head droop, the picture of defeated omega misery. He was silent for a long moment. I could feel his gaze on me, assessing, weighing. I knew what he saw: vulnerability, a problem he could solve, a beautiful thing he could potentially own. It was exactly what I wanted him to see. "You're blocking the entrance," he said, his voice deep, exactly as I remembered, but colder. "I'm sorry, Alpha," I murmured, using the title to subtly acknowledge his dominance, to stroke that instinct. I tried to push myself up, letting my arms tremble violently before I slipped on the wet pavement, falling back with a small pained cry that wasn't entirely fake. The concrete was hard. Another beat of silence, then a sigh. "Get up," Kaelan commanded, but there was a thread of something else there, not kindness, possessiveness. "You can't stay here." "I know," I said, looking up at him, letting the rain mix with the tears I'd forced to the surface. "I just needed a moment. I'll go." I saw the conflict in his eyes, the CEO who hated mess, the alpha presented with a helpless, attractive omega in distress. The latter won. "Where is your pack, your family?" he asked, though it sounded more like an interrogation. "Gone," I said, simply, hollowly. It was the truth, just not for the reasons he'd assume. He muttered something under his breath, looking from me to the waiting car and back. The driver held an umbrella over him, protecting him from the very storm I was drowning in. The divide between us couldn't have been more clear. "Get in the car," Kaelan said finally, the decision made.
It wasn't an offer, it was an order. Inside, the world went silent except for the drum of rain on the roof. The car smelled like him, sandalwood, crisp linen, and power. I huddled in the corner, making myself small, dripping onto the immaculate leather. He sat opposite me, his gaze a physical weight. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ari," I said, giving him the name I'd chosen. It was close enough to my own to feel natural, but soft, omega soft. "Ari," he repeated, and something flickered in his stormy eyes. A distant memory, or just the satisfaction of labeling what he now controlled? "You will stay at my penthouse tonight. Tomorrow we will sort this out." "Thank you, Alpha," I breathed, letting genuine relief color my voice. The relief was real because the plan was working. His penthouse was a monument to cold luxury, all sharp angles, glass and steel. It was beautiful and utterly empty. He pointed down a hallway. "Guest room is there. Shower. Don't touch anything." I nodded, hugging myself. As I passed him, I let my scent, carefully altered by suppressants to mimic a soft, sweet omega in distress, waft towards him. I saw his nostrils flare, his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. A reaction. Good. Alone in the marble bathroom, I let the mask drop for 1 second in the mirror. The scared, wide-eyed omega vanished. My own eyes, sharp and calculating, stared back. I was in. The first domino had fallen. I emerged later wearing borrowed pajamas that swam on me. I found him in the living room, a glass of amber liquor in his hand, staring out at the storm. He turned, and his eyes swept over me. The vulnerability was back on my face in an instant. He gestured to a bowl of soup on the counter, placed there by a staff member I hadn't seen. "Eat." I obeyed, sitting at the island, taking small, careful spoonfuls. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. "Why were you at my building, Ari?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. I'd prepared for this. I looked up, letting my lower lip tremble just a little. "I used to walk past it with my mother," I said, which was true. She said it was a place where strong people built things. Today, I just wanted to feel close to something strong before I let the sentence trail off, looking down at the soup. It was the perfect cocktail of sentiment and submission. He didn't reply, but I felt his gaze linger. Later, as I lay in the impossibly soft guest bed, I heard his footsteps pause outside my door. He stood there for a full minute. I held my breath, playing the part of a sleeping, exhausted omega. I could almost feel his conflicted energy through the wood. The urge to protect, the desire to control, the suspicion he couldn't quite place. He walked away. I smiled in the dark, a slow, secret thing. The hunt had begun. He thought he'd brought home a wounded bird to nurse. He didn't know he'd just let a viper into his nest. My viper's fangs weren't bared for attack, not yet. They were tipped with a different poison. Careful lies, manufactured dependence, and a love so twisted it would have to break him completely to make him whole. As the city lights bled through the window, painting the sterile room in shades of blue and gold, I replayed the look in his eyes when he'd helped me up. Not recognition of the boy he'd known, but the spark of ownership. It was a start. He wanted to tame an omega, and I, Adrian Vale, was going to show him how an enigma tames an alpha. The game was on, and my first move was a check. Mate would be a very, very long way away. Episode 2. The Gilded Cage. The gilded cage of Kaelan's penthouse closed around me with a whisper, not a slam. For a week, I lived the part of Ari, the recovering stray. I moved quietly, spoke softly, and let my borrowed clothes hang off my frame. I was a ghost in his pristine world, and I could see it both irritated and intrigued him. The alpha in him needed to fix what was broken, but the problem was I wasn't giving him anything solid to fix. He'd leave for work, issuing terse commands like, "The housekeeper will be here at 10, do not disturb her," or "There is food in the fridge."
He'd return in the evening, his stormy eyes scanning me as if checking for cracks in his new possession. I made sure he found just one, small one, every single day. My opening came on a Thursday. He'd had a bad day. I could see it in the tight line of his shoulders, the cold fury vibrating off him. He poured a drink, his back to me as I sat sketching on the vast white sofa. I was drawing the skyline, but my lines were deliberately shaky, weak. "Does it help?" he asked suddenly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "The drawing?" I let my hand pause, looking up with those wide omega eyes. "It used to. Now it just reminds me of what I can't have," I said, letting my voice waver. I stood, carefully carrying my glass of water as I moved to look out the window, closer to him. "It's all so strong out there, and I'm in here, just glass." He turned, his gaze heavy on my profile. I could feel his frustration, with his day, with my passive sadness, with the untidy emotion I represented. "Strength isn't given, Ari, it's taken," he said, a harsh edge to his words. "I know," I whispered, and then I made my move. As if startled by his intensity, I took a half step back, my elbow accidentally knocking into his outstretched hand. The crystal glass of amber liquor flew from his grasp, shattering against the marble floor in a violent, wet explosion. The world froze. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Liquor dripped from the edge of the counter. Shards glittered like fallen stars at our feet. Kaelan's control snapped. In a blur of motion, his hand shot out, gripping my upper arm. The force was brutal, yanking me away from the glass, but crushing my flesh in a vice of pure alpha anger. A sharp, pained gasp escaped my lips. This one was real. He was strong. "You clumsy little fool," he snarled, his face inches from mine. The storm in his eyes had broken into a hurricane. "Do you have any idea what your carelessness costs?" This was it, the dark, possessive heart of him, laid bare. I didn't fight, I didn't cower. I went utterly pliant in his grip, my body going soft, but I lifted my chin. I let my own eyes, usually so wide and docile, meet his fury. I let a spark of something else flicker in them, not defiance, but a deep, unsettling acceptance. "Yes," that look said, "this is what you are. Show me." For a second he looked almost stunned. He'd expected tears, apologies, omega submission. He hadn't expected this quiet, eerie reception of his rage. His grip tightened, as if testing my reaction. A thrill, sharp and electric, shot straight down my spine. I welcomed the pain. It was a brand, a connection, the first real truth between us. "I'm sorry, Alpha," I breathed, my voice a thread of sound. "I'll clean it up." "You will," he hissed, but he didn't let go. His other hand came up, his fingers roughly tilting my face towards the light. He was searching, scrutinizing, trying to find the crack that had just seemed to vanish. "What are you?" he murmured, more to himself than to me. The question hung in the air, charged and dangerous. I was Ari, the broken omega, but in that moment he sensed the ghost of something else. Slowly, deliberately, I let my mask slip back into place. The spark died, replaced by a sheen of tears. My body seemed to remember its fragility, a slight tremble returning to my limbs. "I'm just sorry," I whimpered, the perfect picture of chastised vulnerability. The spell broke. He released me so abruptly I stumbled, catching myself on the cold countertop. He took a step back, running his hand through his hair, his breath coming out in a harsh exhale. He looked from me to the mess on the floor, his anger now curdled into a confused, simmering irritation. "Go to your room," he commanded, his voice back to its cold, controlled tone, but it was a thin veneer. I had seen what was underneath. "Yes, Alpha," I whispered, bowing my head. As I turned to leave, I let my gaze sweep over the shattered glass, a tiny, secret smile touching my lips before I could hide it. I didn't go to my room. I went to the guest bathroom, locking the door. In the mirror, I examined the perfect bruising imprint of his fingers on my arm. I pressed against it, relishing the dull ache. It was progress. I had provoked the beast, and instead of running, I had stood in its shadow and smiled. That night, the footsteps outside my door didn't just pause, they lingered longer. I could feel his presence like a heat through the wood, confused, agitated, and undeniably drawn. He was an alpha who prided himself on control, and I, the fragile omega, had just shown him a glimpse of his own loss of it, and he'd seen a ghost of something in me that didn't fear it. The game was no longer just about shelter, it was about corrosion. I would use every fake tear, every flinch, every show of submission to sand away the walls of his arrogance. He wanted to tame an omega? Good, let him try. Every attempt would bring his own wildness closer to the surface. As I lay in the dark, tracing the tender bruise on my arm, I planned my next move. A little jealousy, perhaps. A fabricated name mentioned, a phantom rival to stir that possessive fire again. I needed the storm in his eyes to become a permanent resident. Only then, when he was good and lost in the tempest, would I finally show him the eye of the hurricane. And it would be me. Episode 3. Cracks in the Armor. The bruise on my arm bloomed into a perfect, violent purple. I didn't hide it. When I wore the short-sleeved shirt he'd provided, I made sure to reach for things, letting the fabric ride up, exposing the stark evidence of his hand. I saw his eyes catch on it during breakfast, a flicker of something dark and satisfied passing through the storm before it was banked down. Good. Let him think it was a brand of ownership. It was, but not in the way he believed. It was my foothold into his conscience. My plan for jealousy was simpler than I'd imagined. Kaelan provided it himself. A week after the glass shattered, he came home early. I was in the living room, not sketching this time, but just staring out at the city, performing my perfect imitation of hollow longing. "We're attending a gallery opening tomorrow night," he announced. Not a request, a decree. He tossed a garment bag on the sofa beside me. "Wear this. Be ready at 7. I let my fingers brush the expensive fabric. A gallery? A business associate, an alpha named Silas Reed. He's a patron. Kaelan's voice was casual, but the name was a barb he didn't even know he was throwing. Silas Reed, an art collector, known for his appreciation of beautiful, fragile things. I looked up, injecting just the right amount of hesitant curiosity. Is he kind? Kaelan went very still. The air in the room thickened. "Why do you ask?" The question was a low, warning growl. I shrugged, looking back out the window, a wistful smile on my lips. I just remember reading about him. He helped a young Omega sculptor last year, gave them a full scholarship. I just thought, someone who supports artists like that must see the world differently. I let the words hang, sweet and poisoned. It was all true, which made it perfect. I was showing him a potential sanctuary, an alpha who wasn't just about control, but about nurturing.
Episode 4. The Unveiling.
The silence that followed was volcanic. I could feel the heat of his gaze boring into the side of my head. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of all its usual cultured coolness, rough with a possessiveness so deep it was primal. "You will not speak to him," Kaelan said, each word a chip of ice. "You will stay by my side. You will not look at him. Do you understand?" Then I turned to him, and for the first time, I didn't immediately lower my eyes. I let a flicker of something, not defiance, but a subtle challenge, show in my gaze. "Why, Alpha? Are you afraid he'll see something you don't?" It was the wrong thing to say. Or the perfect thing. He crossed the distance between us in 2 long strides.
His hand didn't grip my arm this time. It shot out, his fingers tangling painfully in my hair, wrenching my head back so I was forced to meet his eyes, now blazing with unchecked fury. The mask of the CEO was gone, completely. Here was the raw, untamed alpha. "You belong to me," he snarled, his breath hot against my face. "Every breath you take in this penthouse is because I allow it. Every piece of clothing on your back is mine. That mark on your arm is mine. You do not get to wonder about other alphas. You do not get to look." The pain in my scalp was sharp, bright. A true Omega would have been sobbing, submitting, scenting of fear. My heart hammered, but not from terror, from a dark, soaring triumph. "Look at you," I thought, staring up into his beautiful, ravaged face. "Look how easily you break for me." I didn't fight his grip. Instead, I went utterly still within it. And then I did something reckless. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a faint, ghostly curl of my lips, a flash of something knowing and utterly out of place on Ari's broken features. My eyes held his, and for that one crystalline second, I let him see the enigma beneath, the calm, calculating power that was not afraid of his storm, but was fascinated by it. His anger stuttered, the fury in his eyes fractured, replaced with a shock so profound it looked like physical pain. He saw it. He saw me. "What?" he breathed, his grip loosening just a fraction. That was my cue. I shattered the moment myself. I let my eyes well up with tears, my body going limp, a pathetic whimper escaping my lips. "You're hurting me," I whispered, the perfect wounded Omega. He dropped his hand as if my skin had burned him. He took a staggering step back, staring at me like I was a ghost, a monster, a puzzle he couldn't solve. His chest heaved. The confusion on his face was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Get out," he rasped, his voice ragged. "Get out of my sight." I didn't run. I bowed my head, letting a single tear trace a path down my cheek, a performer's exit, and walked slowly, shakily, to the guest room. Once inside, I leaned against the locked door, my heart pounding a wild, victorious rhythm against my ribs. I touched the spot on my scalp where his fingers had been. Then I laughed, a soft, dark sound that wouldn't carry beyond the door. He was hooked, not just by the fragile Omega, but by the glitch in the performance, the sharp, unsettling shape beneath the softness. He was obsessed. The jealousy wasn't just about Silas Reed now. It was about me, about the mystery I'd just dangled before him. That night there were no footsteps. The penthouse was silent, but the silence was alive with his turmoil. I knew he was in his study, probably drinking, trying to drown the image I'd seared into his brain, the image of my smile in the heart of his rage. The game had shifted again. The hunter was now haunted by his prey. He would be watching me even more closely now, not just to control, but to catch another glimpse of that other thing, and I would give it to him, in tiny, controlled doses, just enough to drive him mad. The gallery opening tomorrow would be a perfect stage. How would he act now, with that unsettling moment between us? Would he keep me on a shorter leash? Would he be rougher? Or would he be watching, waiting for Ari to slip and show the sharp edges again? I crawled into bed, the phantom ache in my scalp a sweet reminder. I had cracked his perfect control. Next, I would shatter it. And from the pieces, I would build something that belonged only to me. The real hunt, the one where the Omega tames the Alpha, had truly begun. And he was already walking right into my snare, blind to everything but the scent of the enigma he couldn't name. The silence that followed me into the gallery was a living thing. It wasn't the quiet of before. It was a thick, charged tension that vibrated between Kaelan and me, strung tighter than piano wire. I wore the dress he'd chosen, a simple, expensive black sheath that made me look like a fragment of the night, fragile and elegant. He hadn't touched me since the incident with my hair, but his eyes were a constant, heavy weight, tracking my every breath. The gallery was a sea of polished faces and murmured conversations. Kaelan's hand was a firm, impersonal pressure on the small of my back, steering me through the crowd. He was introducing me as his guest, Ari, his voice a cool blade that forbade further questions. I kept my eyes downcast, playing my part, but every sense was tuned to him. I could feel the rigid line of his body, the way his gaze would sharpen whenever another alpha looked my way for a moment too long. And then we saw him. Silas Reed was exactly as I'd pictured, older, with graying temples, and a smile that was all cultured charm. He was surrounded by admirers, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, found Kaelan and then slid to me. Interest sparked there, the kind a collector has for a new, intriguing piece. Kaelan's fingers dug into my back, a silent warning. "Kaelan, so glad you could make it," Silas said, extending a hand. His gaze returned to me. "And who is this?" "Ari," Kaelan bit out, the single word final. "A pleasure," Silas said, and he meant it. He was looking at me like he was seeing past the dress, past the downcast eyes. "There's a piece in the back, a mixed-media sculpture that reminds me of you, ethereal, with a surprising core of strength." His words were innocent, but the implication was a direct challenge to Kaelan's narrative of my fragility. Kaelan went rigid. I felt the anger radiating off him in hot waves. "We won't be staying long," Kaelan said, his voice dangerously low. "A shame," Silas replied, his smile never fading. He leaned in slightly, addressing me directly, ignoring Kaelan's fury. "If you ever find yourself in need of inspiration, my foundation is always open to true talent." It was the perfect spark to the tinderbox. I saw Kaelan's control snap. He didn't speak, he simply turned, his grip on my arm now a vice, and hauled me away from the crowd, through a side door marked private, and into a dimly lit service hallway. The noise of the gallery vanished, replaced by the hum of industrial lighting and his ragged breath. He shoved me against the cold concrete wall, his body caging me in. "What was that?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. The storm in his eyes was a full-blown typhoon now. "You were looking at him. You were considering it." I let my fear show, but I also let a sliver of that other thing peek through, a defiant glint. "He just offered help, Alpha. He sees something. He sees a thing he wants to own," Kaelan roared, his hand coming up to grip my jaw, forcing me to look at him. His scent, all sandalwood and fury, enveloped me, a dominance display meant to overwhelm me. That's when the door at the end of the hall banged open. 3 men stepped in. They were large, moving with a predatory gait that screamed hired muscle. Their eyes, cold and focused, locked not on Kaelan, but on me. I knew in an instant this was old business. Kaelan had enemies, and they'd found a weakness. "Step away from the pretty Omega, Thorne," the lead man growled. "We just want a quick chat, a lesson in humility." Kaelan moved instantly, shoving me behind him, a snarl tearing from his throat. "Touch him and I'll tear your throats out." The men laughed. They had numbers, they had weapons. One pulled a heavy tactical flashlight, another a short, wicked-looking blade. This was not a gallery discussion. This was an ambush. For a moment I watched. I watched Kaelan, my alpha, prepare to fight for me, his body coiled, a beautiful, furious shield. A warm, traitorous feeling bloomed in my chest, but it was quickly smothered by cold, hard reality. They would hurt him, they might kill him to get to me, and I couldn't allow that. He was mine to break. As the first man lunged with the knife, Kaelan moved to block. It was then that I let go. I let go of Ari. My body, which had been trembling against the wall, went utterly still. The fear evaporated from my face, replaced by an expression of cold, detached analysis. I stepped forward, not away. "Kaelan," I said, and my voice was different, flat, commanding. It cut through the violence like a scalpel. He glanced back, confusion warring with his rage. "Ari, stay back!" He never finished. The man with the blade thrust forward. In a movement so fast it was a blur, I was no longer behind Kaelan, I was beside him. My hand shot out, not to block the knife, but to grasp the man's wrist. I used his own momentum, twisting with a sharp, precise jerk. The sound of the bone snapping was a sickening crack in the confined space. The man screamed, the knife clattering to the floor. Time seemed to stop. Kaelan froze, his eyes wide. The second man swung the flashlight. I ducked under the blow, coming up inside his guard. My elbow drove into his solar plexus with a force that drove the air from his lungs in a pained whoosh. As he doubled over, my knee came up, meeting his face with a brutal crunch. He dropped. The third man stared, shocked. He pulled a gun. Idiot! Before he could level it, I was on him. I grabbed his gun hand, forcing it upward, while my other hand chopped at his throat. He gagged, his eyes bulging. I wrenched the pistol from his weakened grip, reversed it, and slammed the grip into the side of his head. He crumpled like a sack of stones. 10 seconds. It had taken 10 seconds. Silence, now broken only by the groans of the men at my feet. The smell of blood and urine filled the air. I stood amidst the wreckage, breathing steadily, the stolen gun held loosely in my hand. I turned. Kaelan was still pressed against the wall, but not by the attackers. He was pinned by shock. His face was a mask of utter, world-shattering disbelief. His stormy eyes were blown wide, traveling from the broken men to the blood on my knuckles, to my face where Ari's softness was gone, replaced by the calm, unflinching gaze of a predator, of an enigma. I dropped the gun. It clattered on the concrete, the sound obscenely loud. The broken student was gone. I straightened my dress, a casual, chilling gesture. I met his shattered stare, and when I spoke, my voice was Adrian's, cool, clear, absolute. "You wanted a perfect omega, Kaelan," I said, tilting my head. The ghost of that same knowing smile from the penthouse touched my lips, but now it was fully formed, a thing of dark triumph. "But you kept insisting on trying to protect me." I took a step towards him, and he actually flinched, the alpha flinching from the omega. The universe had inverted. "You never asked what I was." I was close enough now to see the tremble in his hands, to see the beautiful, agonizing collapse of every single truth he'd built. His eyes searched mine, desperately looking for Ari, finding only the abyss. "Who?" he choked out, the word a broken thing. "What are you?" I reached out, and he stiffened, but he didn't pull away. I brushed a speck of blood from his perfect cheekbone, my touch feather-light, intimate, and utterly terrifying. "My name is Adrian Vale," I whispered, the final devastating truth. "And you, my dear Alpha, have just become my problem to solve." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the wreckage, surrounded by the proof of my lie, the gun on the floor between us, and the chilling, irreversible understanding that the prey he'd brought home had never been prey at all. The hunt was over. The taming was about to begin. Episode 5. The Conqueror's Claim. For 3 days, the penthouse was a tomb. I moved back into my true skin, into my own clothes, sharp, tailored things in black and gray that fit the form he'd never truly seen. I occupied his space as if it were my own, because it was now. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick with the aftershock of what he'd seen in that hallway. The blood had been cleaned up, but the memory hung in the air, sharper than any scent.
He stayed in his study. I heard the clink of bottles, the low, frustrated snarls, the mighty Alpha hiding, broken not by a rival, but by the truth. It was exquisite. On the fourth night, the door finally crashed open. He stood there, a silhouette of beautiful ruin. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, burning with a chaotic mix of fury, betrayal, and a raw, hungry confusion that made my pulse jump. He'd been drinking, but the alcohol hadn't dulled the storm. It had stripped it bare. Adrian. He spat my name like a curse, swaying slightly in the doorway. Kaelan, I acknowledged, not looking up from the book I was pretending to read. I was on his white sofa, a dark stain on his pristine world. He staggered forward. All of it. A lie. The tears, the fear, the brokenness. His voice cracked on the word. A performance, I corrected softly, finally meeting his gaze. Tailor-made for you, for the Alpha who only wanted a perfect, pliant Omega. I closed the book and set it aside. You got one. You just didn't understand what perfect meant. A guttural sound escaped him. He lunged, not with the calculated violence of before, but with the clumsy, desperate rage of a wounded animal. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging in, shaking me. Why? I let him. I absorbed his fury, his pain, letting it wash over me. This was the crucible. You said you'd only ever bond with a true Omega, I said, my voice eerily calm amidst his tempest. You dismissed everything else as clutter. I was the boy you protected once, and then erased. So I became what you wanted, to get close, to have you. To have me? He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You think this deception, this is how you claim an Alpha? No, I said, and in one fluid motion I reversed our positions. My own strength, no longer hidden, erupted. I broke his grip, spun him, and shoved him back against the same wall he'd pinned me against a lifetime ago. His eyes flew wide, shock overriding the fury. The physical proof of my power, used against him, stole his breath. This is, I whispered. I closed the distance, my body pressing his against the cold glass. This close, I could feel his frantic beat of heart, smell the sour sweat of his despair mixed with the intoxicating, wild scent of him. My hand came up, not to strike, but to cradle his jaw, my thumb stroking over his parted lips. He shuddered, a full-bodied reaction that was pure, undiluted reaction. You are chaos, Kaelan, I murmured, my lips brushing the shell of his ear. Beautiful, arrogant chaos, and you tried to cage a storm you couldn't comprehend. My storm. He tried to struggle, a last feeble push of alpha pride. I pressed harder, pinning him completely, my knee nudging between his thighs. A ragged moan escaped him, and the fight bled out of his eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrified arousal. This was the darkest surrender. You wanted to tame an Omega, I continued, my other hand sliding down to the small of his back, pulling his hips against mine. A ragged moan escaped him, and the fight bled out of his eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrified arousal. This was the darkest surrender. You wanted to tame an Omega, I continued, my other hand sliding down to the small of his back, pulling his hips against mine. Now let the Enigma tame you. I kissed him. It wasn't the gentle kiss Airy might have given. It was a claiming, hard, demanding, all teeth and possession. It was a mirror of his own darkness, given back to him perfected. For a second, he was stiff, unyielding. Then, with a sound like a dying man's last breath, he kissed me back. His mouth opened under mine, not in submission, but in a savage, equal hunger. He tasted of whiskey and ruin,
and it was the sweetest thing I'd ever known. It was a war fought with lips and tongues and desperate hands. We tore at each other's clothes, not with lovemaking grace, but with the urgency of two collapsing stars. The glass wall was cold against his back, my body the only heat. There were no more lies between us, just this brutal, honest need. When I took him, it was on the floor, amidst the shreds of our garments. There was no gentleness. It was a conquest, deep and punishing. He cried out, his head thrown back, his fingers scrabbling against the marble as I moved, setting a relentless, claiming rhythm. But his eyes were open, locked on mine, and in them I saw it, not just shock, not just pleasure, but a terrifying, awestruck recognition. He was seeing me, all of me, and he was falling into the abyss, willingly. Mine, I growled against his throat, my teeth scraping over the frantic pulse there. Say it. He shook his head, a final, beautiful defiance. So I drove into him harder, deeper, until a sob was ripped from his chest. Yours, he gasped. God, Adrian, yours. It was the key turning in the lock. My victory surged, hot and undeniable. As his body tightened, hurtling towards its peak, I bent my head to the junction of his neck and shoulder. My teeth broke his skin, not the gentle bite of an omega, but the deep, permanent scar of the Enigma. I marked him as my mate, my bond searing into his very soul as his climax tore through him. He screamed, his body arching under mine, not in pain, but in a shattering release that was both surrender and ascension. We lay there in the wreckage, his blood bitter on my tongue, his scent now irrevocably twined with mine. The silence returned, but it was new. It was the silence after the storm has passed, leaving a forever changed landscape. Weeks later, the bruises had faded. The mark on his neck was a dark, proud brand. The penthouse was still pristine, but the energy had shifted. He sat at his desk, the powerful CEO, but his eyes, when they found me across the room, held a different kind of storm, one of obsession, of devotion, of a tamed wildness that was now tethered only to me. I walked over, a simple domestic gesture. I stood behind his chair, my hands resting on his shoulders. He leaned back into my touch, a soft sigh escaping him. It was a gesture of pure belonging. Then I leaned down, my lips close to his ear. My hand drifted from his shoulder, down over the hard plane of his stomach, coming to rest low on his abdomen, just below his navel. By the way, I whispered, my voice a dark, promised secret. You should know. The taming is complete, and the first proof is growing right here. He felt him freeze, his breath hitched. He understood instantly the impossible biology of an enigma, the final, absolute reversal. His hand came up to cover mine, his fingers intertwining with my own over the place where my child, our child, was beginning to form within him. He didn't speak. He turned his head, pressing his face against my arm, his shoulders shaking. But it wasn't grief. It was the final shuddering collapse of the old world and the breathtaking, terrifying birth of the new one I had built for us. I had wanted to charm my childhood crush. I had wanted to tame the alpha. I had done far more. I had conquered him, marked him, and planted my legacy in the very core of his being. The broken student was a ghost. The Enigma stood victorious, with his mate, his claim, and their future secured in the most intimate battlefield of all. Epilogue. 5 years later, the mark on Kaelan's neck is faded but undeniable. He runs Thorne Holdings with the same fierce intelligence, but the board now knows any challenge is answered by the quiet, watchful man at his side, his husband, Dr. Adrian Vale.
Our sun, with Kaelan's stormy eyes and my calm, plays at our feet in the penthouse that is finally a home. The dark romance of our beginning has settled into a deeper, unshakable truth. He is mine. I am his. The Enigma tamed the Alpha, not by breaking his spirit, but by forging a bond stronger than any lie. That concludes The Enigma's Taming, a story that began with a lie in the rain and ended with a bond forged in fire and truth. Thank you for walking this twisted, sensual path with Adrian and Kaelan. If this twisted romance captivated you, please follow, rate, and review. It helps new listeners find their next obsession. Now we leave you with a question. In a world of alphas and omegas, who truly holds the power? The one who dominates by nature, or the one who is cunning enough to design the entire game?